Something deep inside you already knows. It senses that behind every certainty, there's an emptiness that lingers, a stillness that remains no matter how much you move. What we call life might only be the surface of a vast ocean you've never dared to dive into. Carl Jung once said, "True freedom only comes when you see and go beyond the illusion." Everything we think of as reality, beliefs, identity, desires, success, may just be conditioned patterns of the mind. In this video, we'll uncover why most people live on autopilot, and more importantly, how you can break free. You'll learn what truly happens when you start breaking the inner chains, and why this could become the most important turning point of your life. Watch until the end, because today might mark the beginning of an entirely new way of living, lighter, truer, and fully yours. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. The way you behave, the things you say about yourself, the decisions you make to fit in, all of it was learned. The image you present to the world has been shaped over years, molded by expectations, habits, wounds, and rewards. Over time, that image becomes your identity. The mask fuses with the face, and the role starts to feel real. Jung said the ego, this constructed image of ourselves, is part of life, but it's not the center. It helps organize things, but it doesn't show the core. When the ego takes up all the space, everything outside it feels foreign, threatening, or meaningless. That's when a vague, hard-to-name feeling starts to surface, a sense of emptiness, discomfort, a silent question that won't go away even when everything seems fine. Life feels right, but not real. This feeling marks the beginning of awakening. It shows you that what seems solid is actually fragile, that routine isn't enough, that the character you've been playing no longer represents who you are, something. Inside you starts asking for truth, not the truth you were taught, but the truth that comes from listening inwardly. That question grows louder. Who am I without the roles I've learned to play? And that changes everything. It's not a mental question. It comes from a deeper, older place. It doesn't demand an instant answer. It asks for presence, silence, and the courage to look beyond the surface. Real life begins when you see that what you call reality was just a script. You realize you were trained to please, to avoid rejection, to seek approval, but there's something far greater beyond all of that. Awakening isn't about escaping the world. It's about seeing it with new eyes. It's realizing that the certainties you believe were just repeated stories. And behind all that adaptation is someone waiting to be remembered. Truth doesn't require force. It appears when the layers fall away. And deep down, you know it, that calling was always there. But over time, the image you've tried so hard to maintain starts to feel heavy. You begin to notice a gap between what you show and what you truly feel. And carrying that gap comes at a high price. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the social mask you create to fit in. If you follow this channel, you know we talk about this a lot. The persona is a key concept because it shows up everywhere, in relationships, choices, crises, and that creeping sense of emptiness. Here's what you need to know right now. The persona isn't bad. It's part of your development. It helps you navigate the world. But over time, it needs to be put back in its place. The problem begins when the persona takes over everything, when it stops being a tool and becomes a hiding place. That's when life starts to feel less authentic. You respond with old automatic patterns. You laugh out of habit. You go through the motions, but inside, something is already disconnected. Most people don't notice this immediately, but the body feels it. The soul feels it. The signs appear. unexplained exhaustion, irritability, identity confusion, a sadness that ebbs and flows. This isn't drama or weakness. It's the call for something more real. The longer you live through the persona, the harder it becomes to access your own truth. Because the persona acts like a filter. Anything that doesn't match its image gets repressed, muffled, hidden, anger, vulnerability, the desire for change that never lifts off the ground. Here's the big risk. You start believing that what you feel is wrong, that you need to fix yourself, control yourself, adjust yourself. But in truth, all these feelings are signals. They're signs that something deeper inside you wants to come forward. Once you notice this internal conflict, there's no turning back. What once felt like you now feels like a prison. All that control turns into exhaustion. The need to appear okay becomes suffocating. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt this. But here's where transformation begins. You don't need to destroy the persona or tear down the image you built. What you need is to recognize that something deeper is asking for space. A part of you that no longer wants to pretend or please. It just wants to be dot as the persona starts to crumble. Something inside will try to cling to the old ways. That inner voice that insists on keeping control. It wants to preserve the structure, protect what's been built. It says, if I'm not in control, everything will collapse. This internal narrator defines what you like, what you avoid, what you believe. Its job is to create a timeline, past, future, goals, stories, all revolving around one axis. This is who I am. But here's the truth. This identity has a fundamental limit. It believes your entire life can fit into that tiny framework. In Jungian psychology, the ego is just one piece of consciousness. It mediates between you and the world, but it cannot hold the fullness of who you are. When it tries to sit at the center, the result is always the same: tension, anxiety, over-control, rejection of the unknown. This is where many people get stuck, because that defensive mechanism fears the void. It trembles in front of anything it can't map, label, or predict. And yet it's precisely in that unknown territory that the most powerful and transformative parts of life exist. The ego resists, but life insists. Troubling dreams, intense reactions, unexplained anxiety, all are signals that something beyond the conscious mind wants to emerge, something you can't dominate, only recognize. The crisis of no longer knowing who I am isn't a failure. It's an invitation to let go of old labels and discover what existed before the names. It's a shift from controlling to listening. That controlling voice will try to regain center stage again and again, rationalizing, reducing mystery to concepts. And that's okay. It's just doing its job as the guardian of the known. But you didn't come here to repeat. You came to discover yourself. Real life doesn't begin when everything is under control. It begins when control loses its grip. When listening becomes more important than rigidity. When the ego stops ruling and starts serving. True freedom arises when you see and transcend the fiction dot in practice. As long as you're identified with the persona, with what others expect, with what's socially acceptable, you'll live like someone listening to music so loud they can't hear their own melody. As long as your identity is the center of your universe, everything outside its orbit feels like a threat. Intense emotions, deep doubts, inevitable changes, all seen as enemies instead of messengers dot, traps you inside a bubble, an idea of yourself that demands constant defense. But inside that bubble, there's no growth, just endless repetition. Seeing the illusion is the first step in realizing that bubble isn't the real world, and the identity you built, however impressive, isn't the totality of your being. Transcending the illusion doesn't mean giving everything up or detaching from the world. It means letting go of blind identification with what you were taught. It's about making space for what's true inside you, even if it has no clear shape or immediate explanation. Freedom begins when you stop hiding behind stories. When you no longer need to seem strong, right, spiritual, or in control. When you're no longer afraid to be contradictory, sensitive, or confused, because you know that's also you. The freedom Jung speaks of isn't external. It doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from what you integrate, from what you allow yourself to see, feel, and hear, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the real start of the journey. The illusion falls away when you stop chasing who you think you should be and start allowing who you truly are to surface. From here, the search changes direction. Instead of clinging to what you show, you begin exploring what's hidden. And the more you access what lies beyond the visible, the more whole you feel. Even when you think you're in control, there's something behind your decisions, emotions, and reactions that doesn't follow logic. That part is the unconscious. In Jungian psychology, the unconscious isn't just a warehouse of forgotten memories. It's active. It has force, language, intention. It appears in dreams, slips of the tongue, impulses you don't understand, emotions that seem to come from nowhere, repeating patterns you try to avoid but can't. You're on stage, but the script is being written behind the curtain. While the ego believes it's running the show, the unconscious is guiding your life down unseen paths. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's one of the keys to freedom. When you start paying attention to your dreams, automatic reactions, and repeating patterns, you realize they're carrying messages. Life is trying to show you something. Not in plain words, but through symbols, sensations, and repetitions that won't stop until you finally listen. The unconscious isn't your enemy. It holds everything you've repressed or set aside so the persona and ego could maintain control. But there's a limit. Everything that's been ignored eventually comes back, asking for attention. That's why true transformation often begins with chaos. A disturbing dream, an emotional collapse, an unexpected failure. These moments aren't punishment. They're invitations, signals that something inside you needs to be seen more deeply. True freedom, like we've said, begins when you go beyond illusion, including the illusion of control. You're not in charge of everything, but you can start to listen to what genuinely moves you. You don't need to understand it all. You just need to be willing to feel honestly, to recognize that what comes from within carries more truth than any external image. From here, the journey touches deeper layers because what you've tried to hide is often exactly what needs to be integrated. You are taught to highlight your strengths, to showcase what's admirable and acceptable, and you are also taught to hide what doesn't fit. Anger, jealousy, fear, vanity, all that got pushed out of awareness, away from your ideal image. That hidden part has a name, the shadow. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is everything you've repressed to maintain the image of being good, controlled, mature. But it doesn't vanish. It waits quietly in the background, ready to emerge, often with force, because it's been ignored for too long. The illusion is believing you are only what you show, only the evolved, conscious part. But when you over-identify with your own goodness, you start projecting what you can't accept onto others. What you condemn in others might be exactly what you haven't faced in yourself. And that's not an accusation. It's an opportunity for deeper. Self-knowledge. The shadow isn't evil. It's part of your humanity. It's what was excluded out of fear, shame, or habit. And the more you push it away, the more divided you become inside. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean giving in to every impulse. It means recognizing they exist, that you are a mix of contradictions, of light and dark, courage and fear, kindness and selfishness. All of this together makes you whole. Denying the shadow creates emotional rigidity, a way of living where everything must always be right. But life doesn't work like that, and no one can maintain that image of perfection for long without suffering inside. When you begin looking at your shadow honestly, you don't become worse, you become whole. And being whole is far more powerful than just appearing good. The freedom we long for depends on this, no longer needing to hide what you feel or justify every flaw. To be able to say, I'm not only light and that's okay. The shadow doesn't need to be feared. It needs to be acknowledged. Because it's in that encounter that true healing begins. There's a kind of prison most people don't even see at first. It has no bars or walls. On the contrary, it looks like ambition, movement, seeking. But that's exactly why it holds so tightly. It's the prison of desire. Since childhood, you were trained to chase approval, achievement, affection, safety. Each goal offers temporary relief, and then a new lack, a new goal. A new urgency stirs inside you. It's as if something is never complete, like a piece is always missing. Schopenhauer said to desire is to suffer. Krishnamurti called desire an illusion. Jung agreed, but he went even further. The problem isn't just desire. It's that most of your desires don't even come from you. They rise from the unconscious. In other words, you think you're choosing, but you're being pushed from within without knowing why. And that's how desire becomes a trap. You long to be admired, accepted, recognized, but who inside you is really asking for that? Is it your essence? Or is it an old, wounded part still waiting to be seen? Most people live trapped in this cycle without realizing it. They achieve something, feel brief relief, but soon another need appears. And so they keep running, believing the next thing will finally fix everything. But it never does. The more you feed this cycle, the further you drift from yourself. Endless desire robs you of the present. It won't let you stop, feel, or notice what's already here right now. This doesn't mean you should live without desire. It means you must see where it comes from. When you understand the origin of your desire, it stops being a prison and becomes conscious direction. Desire only imprisons when you believe you need to chase something to become whole. But when you realize you're already whole, desire becomes choice, not urgency. That awareness changes everything. Where there was haste, there's now presence. Where there was lack, there's now clarity. Where there was illusion, there's now the freedom to want, without getting lost in wanting. You think you're seeing the world as it is, but you're actually seeing the world as you are. The mind doesn't record reality neutrally. It interprets, filters, selects. Your perception is shaped by what you carry inside. Your wounds, fears, unmet desires, unaccepted parts. The world becomes a mirror. When you feel anger, ask, is this really about the other person? Or is something in me being triggered? When you feel envy, jealousy, admiration, ask, what part of me is being revealed? It's hard to admit, but every emotional reaction carries a message about yourself. This is what Jung called projection, seeing outside, what you haven't yet accepted inside. That doesn't mean everything's in your head, but it does mean your interpretation of events is shaped by your inner state. If the lens is clouded by old wounds or distorted beliefs, everything you see outside will carry that distortion. This is a turning point. You can't change the world without first changing how you see yourself. It's not about blame. It's about awareness. When you realize what irritates you in others might be reflecting something in you, you open a door to healing. When you understand that exaggerated admiration might point to an unlived potential in yourself, you begin to truly grow. The more you recognize your projections, the lighter life becomes. Conflicts ease, patterns break, and slowly the world stops being a threat and becomes an opportunity for self-discovery. Letting go of illusion sounds beautiful, but in practice, it's uncomfortable. Not because it's hard to release what's false, but because behind the illusion, there's a space that terrifies you, the void. For years, you've clung to your stories, your self-image, your certainties. When those structures collapse, it feels like you've lost the ground beneath your feet. No name, no direction. That's when many people retreat. Truth isn't hard to find. It reveals itself when you let go of roles, expectations, rehearsed identities. What's hard is the fear of being nothing after you let go. The ego fears the void. It needs identity, control, explanation. It wants to know who it is, where it's going, what's coming next. But when control fades, inner silence arises. And that silence, at first, feels like absence. But what seems like absence is actually pure presence. The ego doesn't recognize this. It calls it loss, crisis, emptiness. It rushes to rebuild the old narrative, just to avoid facing the open space that appears when you let go. But that space is not a hole. It's a doorway. Everything true in you needs. No explanation, no mask, no approval. It just needs space. The void is where illusions die, but it's also where what is essential can finally be born. Many escape at this point. They distract themselves, stay busy, overthink. But those who stay, even in the discomfort, discover something rare. There's life in the silence. There is strength in not knowing. There is a presence that doesn't depend on any definition. In that place, the ego loses control, and at the same time, you feel more alive than ever. The path doesn't require you to know everything. It asks for the courage to stay with what is real, even when you don't yet know who you are. After so long trying to fit into roles and hold up a narrative, a quiet, powerful question begins to emerge. Is there something in me that doesn't depend on any of that? Jung called that something the self. The self isn't another identity. It's not a new character or a better version of who you think you should be. It's the true center, the balancing point between what you know and what you haven't yet seen, between what you show and what you feel, between the conscious and the unconscious. The ego tries to control life. The self observes. The ego reacts. The self responds when necessary. The ego seeks affirmation. The self simply is. You feel the self in moments when everything inside aligns, even if the outer world is chaotic. When something touches you deeply and you can't explain why. When a choice arises with quiet certainty, even if it defies logic. When a difficult situation comes, and instead of falling apart, you feel present, whole, alive. The self isn't a theory. It's an experience. It's what remains when you let go of everything false. It's what reveals itself when the noise dies down. Reconnecting with the self brings a sense of home. Not a home of walls and certainty, but an inner space where you no longer have to prove yourself, where you allow yourself to be whole with everything you feel, without needing to fit an ideal self-image. That center doesn't require effort to exist. It just asks you to stop resisting. The further you move from the persona, the closer you get to that quiet core. And little by little, life takes on a different tone. It's no longer about performance. It's about presence. And when you align with that, what used to be a search becomes a discovery. One called this process individuation. It's becoming whole. It's moving away from ready-made ideas of who you should be and step by step getting closer to who you already are. But haven't fully lived yet. This path doesn't make you special or superior. It just makes you real. And that alone changes everything. With each layer of illusion that falls, a real piece of you emerges. Sometimes with clarity, sometimes with pain, but always with power. This journey is quiet, internal. Almost no one sees it, but you feel it. And that's enough. Even after all the awakening, there's one final trap. The illusion that you've already awakened. The ego adapts. It creates a spiritual version of itself. Now it speaks beautifully, knows the concepts, but deep down, it's still trying to prove something. Jung warned. Even the light casts a shadow. Real clarity isn't thinking you're done. It's knowing you'll never be fully done. There will always be unseen parts, subtle patterns, unprocessed emotions. The ones who are truly awake aren't superior. They're more humble, more open, more present, and more willing to listen. Even when their own shadow reappears. Maybe now it's time for a different question. What's left when all the masks fall away? Many people reach this point expecting a final answer, a new identity, a final certainty. But what you find here is something else. Silence, space, presence. Truth doesn't arrive as a theory. It has no form, no explanation. It doesn't fulfill the ego's promises. It simply remains. And what remains, when everything else loses meaning, is what truly belongs to you. Not what you were taught, not what they expected, not what you tried to be to feel accepted. What remains is you, whole, stripped of illusion, truly alive. This is where freedom begins. Not as a final state, but as a new way of walking through the world, without unnecessary weight, without needing to prove anything, without hiding from yourself. Jung said, the unlived life is a disease of the soul, and the only possible cure is to start living yours. With pain, with beauty, with doubt, with simplicity, with silence. Truth doesn't require effort. It doesn't need an ideal self. It just needs space to exist. Maybe. Your journey so far was about trying to fit in, to make sense, to be someone. But now you know, the meaning isn't in the character. It's in presence. It's in the now. It's in living as you are, without more layers between you and life. Even if nothing outside has changed, something inside has already shifted. Lighter, clearer, more honest. This is where everything begins again. Not to become someone different, but to finally live as you are. You're here. That's enough. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below. The illusion fell and I'm still here. That phrase shows you watched to the end and you're ready to live with more truth. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, you can click the thanks button below. Any support helps this content reach more people and go further. Thank you for walking this path with me. I'll see you in the next video.